baby, you still headline every song. I lied when I said that you weren't my first love. It's just when it came to other guys, they all just seemed like the worst. Oh, stay with me. Stay with me. I never meant for things to get so bad.
Great. Thanks so much for having us. Before I start, I just want to kind of get an idea of how familiar everyone is with the Green New Deal as an idea, like a bit of policy. So can I just get everyone to kind of like put their hands up if they feel like they're quite familiar with it, so then I know how much background to give on it. Okay, cool. So like not everybody. So I'll give a bit of background on it. So I think, yeah, the Green New Deal is, it came out of originally a report published by Anne Pettifer and others at NEF, like a think tank, including Caroline Lucas back in 2008, and in the UK. And then it was like popularized by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in America and the Sunrise Movement. And it kind of became more of a thing in the US almost 10 years after that report was written. And then more recently, a lot of you might have kind of heard about it because of the Labour for a Green New Deal campaign, which was really successful, and it got passed as policy at conference, which I think is one of the most like exciting examples of democratic policy making in the party. And it's sad that we lost, and that would have been very useful now, I think. But yeah, and crucially, the Green New Deal is eco-socialism, and it's moving away from traditional climate activism, which is in that it addresses class politics at the same time. So it's because for a long time we've been relying on operating under a eco-capitalist model where we've sort of been relying on the market to save the planet. And we're all supposed to do our bit by buying bamboo toothbrushes and using reusable tote bags and that sort of thing, which is all valuable in its own way, but that on its own isn't going to address a problem which is obviously kind of caused by capitalism. And I think recently the focus has shifted a bit, and XR really like opened up the conversation and kind of took that conversation to governments and big business, like where the bulk of that responsibility lies. And I think like a phrase that gets used a lot is that like Extinction Rebellion and the Youth Strikers and those sort of organizations were the fire alarm, and then the Green New Deal and organizations working on that are the firefighters. That's the solution to the problem. So yeah, I think that's like the thing that most excites me about the Green New Deal is that it engages people in the climate movement who felt excluded traditionally from climate activism, because a lot of the sort of like green alternative products that you have to buy like are more expensive, and sort of it's not something, if you're, you know, struggling paycheck to paycheck, your immediate problems are going to be, you know, dealing with the effects of austerity, and not you're not going to be thinking about something which is like causing, like, it's like a scary and big thing to have to think about, and it probably isn't the first thing on your mind. So I think, but if we're focusing on the solution, then that's obviously a good thing. And like I think one of the main points to take out of the Green New Deal is the idea of the just transition, which is where all the workers who are employed in fossil fuel extractive industries, if we just suddenly stopped using fossil fuels and started using green energy, we need to make sure that all those people who are employed in fossil fuel industries aren't just suddenly out of a job. And it's about moving those people over to green unionized jobs, and making sure that it's not like the workers that suffer from that transition. So that's kind of just a bit of a background on the Green New Deal in general. And I think I'll hand over to Billy now to talk a bit about Green New Deal UK specifically and their kind of model of a Green New Deal.
Excellent, thank you, Poppy. Yeah, so Green New Deal UK are a new national organisation founded towards the end of last year, but have really started getting going in the last couple of months. Obviously, we've all been hampered in what progress we're able to make by the lockdown, but we're confident that we've still been doing some pretty good work, and once we're all able to get out and about again, there'll be lots more fun action to come. The idea of Green New Deal UK is that it will build mass public support for a Green New Deal, so around a lot of the demands that Poppy's just referenced. There's a recognition that we've got 4 years until, well, maybe we won't see a full parliamentary term, but we'll assume we've got 4 years until the next election. We have to act now. We can't wait until the next election cycle. We can't hope that the Labour Party or the Greens or any other opposition party are going to adopt our demands if we don't push them on it. So the idea behind Green New Deal UK is to build a mass movement, build mass public support, organising around a Green New Deal, holding the government to account, and making sure that opposition parties adopt our demands, so that when they're in a position to win power, they've got not only the right policy ideas, but there's also a mass social movement behind them, holding those parties to account and making sure they implement our demands. There are loads and loads, as Poppy has explained, loads of different iterations of what a Green New Deal is, loads of different ideas about what a Green New Deal is. Green New Deal UK have sort of crystallised that, broken it down into 5 key demands. So our 5 key demands are the total decarbonisation of our economy, as Poppy referenced as well, millions of well-paid, secure, unionised jobs, the fundamental transformation of our economy, protecting and restoring habitats and carbon sinks, and promoting global justice. So these are things which are quite often appear in different versions of Green New Deal, but for the purposes of Green New Deal UK, it's 5. Easy to convey, easy to talk about, easy to get behind. The theory of change that sort of like motivates a lot of what Green New Deal does, as I've sort of explained, it's about building a big social movement and winning popular support. So a lot of the work that we've done in climate justice movements in the past, you'll often find that people are overwhelmingly supportive of the policies and the demands, if only they're given an opportunity to hear about them. And for far too long, our mainstream political parties have failed in their responsibility to put climate justice and our demands at the forefront. In 2019, the Labour Party did much better with its Green Industrial Revolution, but it was still very much marginalised during the election campaign. It wasn't front and centre as it should have been. And when people had those policies communicated to them, as I said, they were overwhelmingly supportive. It's just you need the apparatus, you need the movement to really convey those ideas. So that's what we're about. The way that we believe that we can do that is by having lots of decentralized local organizing hubs spread all over the country. And what's really key to that is that not only do you have these movements sort of embedded within their communities, but it also gives us the opportunity as organizers for Green New Deal UK to develop really localized prescriptions for what a Green New Deal should look like in that community. This isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. Obviously, our Green New Deal has to be internationalist. We're saving a planet, we're not saving a country. But if we're going to win public support for a Green New Deal, it has to be on local terms, on the terms of the community who are going to be affected. So the Green New Deal will look different in Chester to what it will look like in Blackpool, and it'll look different in Blackpool to what it will look like in Harrogate. For instance, it'll be really, really key, particularly with the just transition for workers and jobs. It's really key that we look at the industries that historically have been the place, and how you can, if you're talking about a former mill town in the northwest, it makes sense to use that industrial experience. It makes sense to use that cultural heritage in the development of a transition to green jobs. Which is why it's absolutely key that the local organising hubs are really embedded in their communities. They're really sort of represent all sorts of people who wouldn't ordinarily be involved in climate justice movements. And it'll be so much easier for us to bring people along with us if we're able to demonstrate that this is going to be transformative, not just for the world, for the country, but also for their local communities. It's going to affect themselves and their families. It's going to affect their neighbours who they care about. And that's kind of what separates Green New Deal UK apart from other existing climate justice movements, which historically, if you've been involved in climate justice movements, you'll be able to testify to this. But it's always a very, it's the same group of people who always get involved in these various movements. And if we're to win, which we need to, we haven't got a choice, it needs to be bigger than that this time. It needs to be all encompassing. It has to reach communities that have never got involved in this sort of stuff before. And the way that you do that is by having, we believe, these really hyper localized organizing hubs. So that's kind of what sets us apart. And yeah, I guess now that's probably a good time to hand back over to Poppy and talk about how that fits into, or how coronavirus has kind of hampered our development and how we can organize in a time of coronavirus.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, thanks, Billy. I think obviously the coronavirus crisis has like shifted people's priorities, and the focus is on like dealing with the immediate crisis that we're facing. So a lot of organising is being done around like the mutual aid groups and that sort of thing, but kind of figuring out how that fits into organising around a Green New Deal or addressing the climate crisis is yeah, we've got to like sort of think about how that's going to work. So I think that the main there's a phrase that's been used quite a lot, which is the just recovery, which kind of comes from the idea of the just transition, and it's that the recovery from this current like COVID-19 crisis has to also address the climate crisis, because we've got these two crises kind of happening, and it would be foolish to address one and not the other. But it's not to say that we have to sort of like abandon dealing with the or neglect dealing with the immediate crisis just because there's this other, sorry, I'm not explaining that very well, but yeah, we can address both at the same time, and I think the key part of that is that we're going to need a huge economic restructuring to coming out of this crisis, and the Green New Deal is a huge restructuring of the economy, so now is like the perfect time to do that. We also can't let the Conservatives use this as an excuse to just go back immediately to austerity after this, because I can definitely imagine a situation where they would say, oh well, we've spent all this money on this emergency and now we don't have any left, so that's it, back to austerity, and it will be worse than it was before. We've got to make sure that it's not the workers that are the ones that are hit the hardest coming out of this crisis, which at the moment obviously that is, this government have showed what their priorities are, and it is the workers that are being hit the hardest, with what they announced yesterday, sending construction and manufacturing workers back, and so obviously trade unions' roles in this are going to be key, as they are in the Green New Deal. So I'll give some like examples of that. For example, with bailouts and that sort of thing, we need to be putting pressure on the government and on local authorities as well, to not, so when, for example, oil was at an all-time low, had gone into like negative, so that instead of bailing out the oil industry companies, what can be done in that situation is nationalising those companies and phasing them out, transitioning to green energy. And another key point is that, for example, with it's shown what's possible, I think, as well. So Dyson switched from making hoovers to ventilators, and that was done really quickly, so it just kind of shows how fast the just transition could be. It doesn't have to be a long process. It can be that the same companies keep the same employees and they just change their model of how they produce goods and that sort of thing. another good example is airports. So it actually in Manchester, it's the airport is municipally owned, and it is one of the main sources of income for the 10 borough councils, particularly Manchester City Council, which has the highest share. And what we're campaigning for them to do is, instead of bailing out the airport, is that instead it's bailouts for the workers but not for the airport itself, and it's a reinvestment in things like rail, and you can easily sort of redeploy those workers from the airport and have like municipally owned rail travel and joined up public transport network, which is like a key point from a lot of the Green New Deals as well. But then it also is in things that you don't necessarily think of straight away. So it's not just things like manufacturing and transport and green energy. It's also things like it does tie into the mutual aid stuff quite well, because there's a lot of organisations doing work around food justice, and so where there's a lot of food waste, rather than being thrown away, which is obviously one of the problems with climate, is one of those big contributing factors is food waste, is that that can also be used to deal with hunger and poverty, and a lot of like community kitchens and things like that are doing like deliveries to vulnerable people and that sort of thing at the moment. So looking at something like a national food service is like part of that response to this crisis, and also addressing the climate crisis that I was talking about. And that's another example of how we can kind of do the Green New Deal from the ground up while we don't have a sympathetic government. And I think Billy will talk about this more, but one of the things that Green New Deal UK is doing is linking up a lot of those different organisations that are doing the work that are part of the Green New Deal locally, and like linking them up and kind of making them part of that bigger picture. So yeah, and I think public space as well, our relationship to public space is more important than ever, and it's on people's minds, because if you're living in a block of flats in a city and you don't have access to a garden and there's no parks near where you live, then you're going to be suffering a lot more than somebody living in the countryside, or someone who's got access to more public space and green space. So it kind of makes it ever more relevant that it highlights the difference in class as well, where like however much percent, I'm not sure what the exact figure is, but so much of the country is taken up by golf courses, and that space is privatized. I think it's something like 92% of England is not accessible to the public. I don't quote me on the figure. I'd need to.
Sorry, Poppy. So it's 2% of the UK is covered in golf courses, which is 100% more than is publicly accessible park space, and also more than the entire housing stock takes up.
Yeah, they're good figures. Well, bad figures, but well illustrated. Yeah, so I think they're all things that that are part of a Green New Deal and are more relevant now, and they're things that we can be campaigning around, and things that people are going to be maybe even more receptive to now and willing to kind of build power around in communities. And of course, another part of the Green New Deal is that is investing in like universal basic services and care as well. So key workers have obviously been proved so important. Like everybody's thinking about how important key workers are. They're out clapping for them every Thursday, but they're also, a lot of key workers are some of the lowest paid in society, with a lot of like carers making minimum wage. And so, yeah, I think like while that's on people's minds, investment in social care is so important, and the NHS is so important. Because green jobs aren't just green energy manufacturing jobs. They're also things like social care, which is carbon neutral. So focusing on like socially reproductive like employment and things like that is also, I think, really valuable part of what we can be doing as left-wing activists, as climate activists, as members of the Labour Party or whatever party. Yeah, because I think this has to be a thing that we all work on together. So yeah, I think building on from that, I'll get Billy to talk a bit about Green New Deal UK's campaign around this specifically, which they're not using the term just recovery, but calling it Build Back Better. But I'll hand over to Billy now to talk a bit more about that.
Brilliant, thank you, Poppy. Yeah, so I'll go through now quickly with you all the campaign which is being launched by Green New Deal UK and some other organisations tomorrow morning. Yeah, first I think it's really important to emphasise that I read an article this morning actually, and it was some new polling by YouGov, and 8 out of 10 people said that they would rather use human happiness in the UK. Would rather use human happiness as a metric for I don't know, like how effective society functions as opposed to GDP during the time of coronavirus. And even once this is over, however long that takes, that figure was still 60%. So although we don't really necessarily want to be conceiving of something as traumatic and horrible as this pandemic in terms of it being an opportunity, it absolutely will open political space for progressives who are looking to restructure the economy and who are looking to green the economy. And it's absolutely essential that we seize this political moment and that we're ready to do so as soon as we're able to organise in the real world. So to that end, the launch of the Build Back Better campaign, which is sort of in conjunction with Green New Deal UK, also the New Economics Foundation, Friends of the Earth. There are also lots of other organisations who will be involved, and those will be announced in the next couple of days. But it strikes me as an absolutely vital campaign to be running at this moment in time, and a really useful way to direct our energies as climate justice and progressive activists. So the campaign Build Back Better is generally it's about it being a new deal that protects public services, tackles inequality in our communities, provides secure, well-paid jobs, creates a shock-proof economy, and which can also fight the climate crisis. So it's many of the same demands that are incorporated in a Green New Deal, but also with a view to protecting key workers who have been shown to be absolutely vital and completely underappreciated by this crisis, as well as several other things. So similarly with our demands of a Green New Deal, there are 5 key demands here. The first one being to secure the needs of everyone in the UK now and into the future. So food, health, income, job security, housing, access to clean and affordable energy, public transport, clean air, green spaces. The second one is to protect and invest in our public services, which of course we've seen a huge, there's always been very high levels of appreciation for our public services in this country anyway, but that seems to have gone through the roof, obviously with the clapping for key workers and all that that's happening recently. So obviously that includes, as Poppy was saying as well, social care is absolutely key to this. NHS workers, social care, teachers, schools and colleges, services that absolutely need to be properly funded just for a functioning society, and those need to be protected from privatisation, further privatisation, and steadily or quickly brought back into public ownership. Third demand is rebuilding society with a transformative Green New Deal. I won't spend too much time on that one because I've done so already. Fourth, investing in people, not just big businesses. So ensuring that our the policies and investments for recovery don't prop up the profits of the big banks and executives of corporations fueling climate change and inequality. There's a need to restructure public and private finances so that they distribute power into the hands of people, workers and communities, and support sectors that nourish our society and safeguard our futures. The final point is building solidarity and community across borders. So our recovery should leave no one behind, especially as much of the world begins their fight against coronavirus as well. Another thing this has really brought home is just how interconnected we all are. Everything that we do now and in the longer term recovery should aim to end global injustices. A Green New Deal is not worth having if it just continues to extract resources from underdeveloped countries if it continues to marginalize already the most marginalized people on the planet. And obviously that should guarantee human rights and free movement and promote changes that end global power inequalities. What's also really key to both building back better and also a future Green New Deal is that any technologies we as a highly developed country are able to develop, which aids the greening of our economy, should be shared with underdeveloped countries so that they can do the same and have that just transition themselves. So that's kind of what Build Back Better is in a nutshell. We're launching the campaign specifically tomorrow to coincide with International Nurses Day, which again is kind of self-explanatory what that is. This crisis has brought so much into focus how reliant we are on our healthcare workers, how underappreciated they are, how underpaid they are, how overworked they are. And it seems fitting that we launch it on this day so that the same people who are making the connection now who perhaps didn't previously, between the importance of nurses, are able to link that to, we can't go back to normal. Whatever comes next needs to be a vast improvement on what's come before. So what we're hoping to do tomorrow with the launch, and this has all come about very quickly, is to there's a new social media account that's been created called Build Back Better, @BuildBackBetter, although there's no A in the back because someone already had that account. There'll be a launch video that's shared at 8:30 in the morning, and we would encourage everyone to share that as well, if possible, from their own social accounts. There's a website which has been launched in the last couple of days, and I can share that link in the chat shortly, actually. The website explains in more detail what our demands are, also allows people to put their names into a Google map, which is set outside Parliament Square, so it's sort of meant to represent a protest that would be at Parliament Square, could we go to Parliament Square. And yeah, the idea is just to get as much traction on this as possible, really build a big head of steam up around the Build Back Better campaign, get lots of recognition for what it means and what it entails, and through that as well, encourage and popularize the concept of the Green New Deal that we need to win. So yeah, that's kind of in brief what Build Back Better is. I suppose, unless Poppy has anything else to add, we can take some questions.